Hello everyone. Welcome to the Lightning Ball channel. If you haven't yet subscribed to my channel, please do so and activate the notification bell. Your support fuels my continued efforts. In our previous episode, we witnessed the birth of Manus Maria, granting Yuki immense power and allowing him to successfully lead my Furuki and Laplace out of the dimensional rift back to Central World. In this episode, Yuki would finally reveal his overwhelming strength, effortlessly crushing Jahil in an unavoidable landslide of power. Additionally, we would shift our focus back to the Sarrion battlefield, where, following Yuki's return, powerful forces from all sides would converge. We would witness Sylvia and Laplace's long-awaited reunion, as well as how Veldora and Chloe would respond to Stampede Milim's rampage. In the final moments, Diablo would step onto the battlefield, facing Feldway alone. So, let's get started. Yuki stood there silently, an unshakable wall in Jahil's path. Not far away, Laplace and my Furuki had also arrived. With luminous healing magic, the previously injured Laplace, who had lost his lower half, now appeared fully restored, exuding his usual energy, while my Furuki looked far more at ease than before. Among all present, only Jahil seemed consumed with frustration, grinding his teeth at the sight of these unwelcome returnees. However, the intelligent and arrogant Jahil had already deduced how Yuki had neutralized his attack. He understood that Yuki had likely used his own ability to counter the attack. Even so, Jahil remained confident that Yuki's method had limitations, and if he simply overwhelmed Yuki with absolute power, there would be no way for him to neutralize it all. Yet Yuki merely smiled, unfazed, and casually remarked that Jahil's excessive obsession would only lead to his own downfall. Just because a technique succeeded once did not mean it would always succeed. This was something Yuki had learned the hard way from facing overwhelmingly powerful entities, but Jahil dismissed his words without a second thought. With a sneer, Jahil raised his hand, unleashing a devastating surge of battle aura, a shockwave that violently tore through the air, threatening to obliterate Yuki into oblivion. And then, everyone witnessed the unthinkable. Yuki, with just his left hand, effortlessly brushed aside Jahil's attack as if wiping away a wisp of mist. Jahil was instantly speechless. Even Laplace, despite being on Yuki's side, found the sight completely unbelievable. But Yuki remained utterly indifferent, flashing a sly grin as he remarked that unrefined, uncontrolled energy was nothing more than free fuel for him. Though Yuki exuded absolute confidence, deep down, he had been genuinely alarmed by the sheer force behind Jahil's attack. However, Manus Maria was the truly unfazed one, assuring him that as long as she was present, there was absolutely no problem. Naturally, Yuki was far more concerned about keeping his emotions hidden from the ever-irritating Maria, constantly guarding against any vulnerabilities she might exploit. In truth, Lord of Greed had always excelled at absorbing energy, but even it had limits, as Yuki had painfully learned when facing Velgrind. Yuki, picking up on the irony, openly admitted that he had failed against Velgrind, but before he could continue provoking Jahil, his words were cut short. Because Velgrind was also here. With a slight frown, she chided Yuki's casual manner of addressing her, prompting Yuki to hastily apologize while internally remarking how absurd it was that a true dragon could conceal her presence so effortlessly. Meanwhile, Masayuki, observing the scene, suddenly felt a sense of kinship with Yuki. It turned out that even someone as bold as Yuki was afraid of Velgrind. Rephrasing his words, Yuki clarified that while he had lost to Velgrind, Jahil was still nothing more than an easy opponent. His absorption of energy had thoroughly infuriated Jahil, who let out a furious roar, his eyes burning with pure rage. Yet Yuki remained completely unfazed, openly stating that he was no longer greedy like before. Instead of recklessly absorbing all energy, he had selectively kept what he could handle, while redistributing the excess to his allies. That distribution instantly restored Laplace, my Furuki, Kigali, Tia, and even Eva to peak condition, combined with luminous battlefield-wide restoration magic, ensuring everything was now in place. Yuki's companions, upon realizing this, were overjoyed. Their reliable and invincible leader had returned, freeing them from their previous paralyzing fear of Jahil. Yuki then turned to Kigali, half-jokingly apologizing for stealing her chance at personal revenge, before confidently declaring that defeating Jahil would be effortless. Jahil's expression darkened. A foe he had expected to erase in an instant was now standing before him, mocking him, saying he would easily crush him. It was unforgivable. Seeing that Yuki and Jahil were moments away from clashing, Laplace did not step forward to assist. Instead, he retreated to guard Kigali and the others, positioning himself defensively. Of course, ever meticulous, Laplace had already devised a post-battle plan with Yuki for what to do once Jahil was defeated, something that would be revealed later. Meanwhile, the strongest warriors across the battlefield turned their attention to this unfolding confrontation. Kalgurio and Minutes both knew that Yuki was a troublesome dude, yet they still feared for him against Jahil, even though their instincts told them Yuki would not be defeated so easily. Luminous, ever pragmatic, understood Jahil's true power. If Yuki had joined forces with her, they might have had a real chance at victory. However, for Yuki to face Jahil alone, such an act was sheer madness. Even so, Luminous had already prepared a contingency plan. If Yuki fell, she would immediately resurrect him. Velbrind, on the other hand, had an entirely opposite opinion. She felt that Yuki had grown significantly stronger and, from her own battle with Testarossa, she understood that even a tenfold difference in magicule levels could be compensated for with technique. However, she also sensed that something about Yuki's transformation was highly unusual. The question burned in her mind: what hidden trump card had he acquired? And then, there was Hinata. As Yuki's former countrywoman and fellow disciple, their relationship had been one of mutual use, manipulation, and betrayal. Upon first hearing of Yuki's death, Hinata had been genuinely saddened. But now that he was alive, a different emotion took over. Yuki absolutely could not lose, because she still had unfinished business with him. Ignoring the watchful gazes of all sides, Yuki strode forward, exuding absolute calm. He casually threw out a kick, which Jahil instinctively blocked with his left hand, retaliating instantly with a blazing right punch, a strike so intense that anything it touched would be reduced to ashes. Yet Yuki merely crossed his arms, absorbing the full brunt of the attack, completely unharmed. This was Yuki's test, and from this brief exchange, he confirmed his suspicion: Jahil's body originally belonged to footmen. Though Jahil's energy was undeniably immense, his physical durability was a major limitation. This meant he could not recklessly unleash his full power without consequence. And that, Yuki realized, was Jahil's fatal flaw. Jahil, too, sensed something was wrong. His overwhelming advantage, the immense magicule reserves and ultimate enchantment Lord of Blaze, had proven utterly ineffective. His magic and skill-based attacks were completely negated by Yuki's anti-skill, and his raw energy was absorbed by absorbed life. Regret flashed through Jahil's mind. He should have eliminated Yuki immediately. But it was already too late. With no other options, Jahil was forced to resort to pure physical combat, wielding Origin Blood as he lunged forward in fury. But Yuki, having already anticipated his move, had set up a hidden psychic trap. Jahil stumbled mid-charge. In that instant, Yuki's foot struck out, sending Jahil hurtling backward, his energy drained even further by absorbed life, leaving him rolling across the battlefield in disgrace. Seeing Jahil continuously overwhelmed, Laplace, Tia, Kigali, and the others were both shocked and secretly admiring their leader's overwhelming strength. The moderate Harlequin alliance, having endured countless hardships, could finally glimpse the dawn of a brighter future. However, Mai Furuki remained somewhat distant, her thoughts in turmoil. On one hand, she remained on guard against Jahil, ready to retreat with her allies if the situation spiraled out of control. At the same time, having already severed ties with Feldway's faction, she wished to live freely, yet Yuki's genius might be the key to finding a way back to her original world. However, following Yuki came with its own set of risks, the most pressing concern being his relationship with Rimuru. Though the two were currently allies, aligning with Yuki might stir dissatisfaction among Tempest's many powerful friends. It would be unwise to antagonize Rimuru's terrifying subordinates, and Mai Furuki resolved within herself that if Yuki ever turned against Demon Lord Rimuru, she would do everything in her power to convince him otherwise, striving to change the course of fate before it was too late. Back on the battlefield, as Jahil's repeated attempts failed, his faith in his absolute power began to waver. Magic, raw energy, even close combat, every attack was effortlessly neutralized. The so-called tenfold energy gap between them was nothing more than an illusion. Yuki, like a seasoned hunter, meticulously dissected Jahil's techniques, while Jahil fell deeper into his trap, floundering helplessly with no way to turn the tides. The battle's conclusion was merely a matter of time. All across the battlefield, observers processed the situation differently. Luminous, though harboring no fondness for Yuki, especially after his attempt to steal Cronoa, could not deny that his growth was terrifying. Even though she still found his presence unpleasant, she begrudgingly acknowledged that his conflict with Jahil benefited her. After all, the enemy of her enemy was her friend. She believed that if she fought Yuki seriously, she would ultimately triumph, but against Jahil, she was at a disadvantage. It was a matter of compatibility. Yuki, however, was Jahil's natural counter, and Luminous was more than happy to see him rid her of an annoying enemy. On the surface, she remained composed and dignified, but deep down, she relished the impending victory. Meanwhile, Veldora merely muttered as expected, before redirecting her focus to Ivaraj, showing no surprise whatsoever at Yuki's dominance, as if she had anticipated everything all along. Hinata, on the other hand, felt an immense peer pressure watching Yuki's performance. While continuing her own battle, her mind rapidly calculated countermeasures in case she ever had to fight him herself. The battle was approaching its conclusion. Yuki nonchalantly remarked that he had played enough and that it was time to end things. At that moment, Jahil completely lost control. He could not accept the reality that he, the great sorcerer emperor, the supposed next-generation god, was about to be slain by an insignificant nobody like Yuki. In Jahil's mind, he was the rightful successor of Veldanava. He had witnessed Twilight Valentine bearing the burden of deicide, but he believed there was no need for his father to do such a thing. He could alone accomplish this divine feat. Having orchestrated his own reincarnations, igniting wars to further his ambitions, he had achieved what he believed to be his destiny. And then, for the first time, the truth was revealed. It was Jahil who had slain Veldanava, directly or indirectly. Afterward, his kingdom was destroyed, and he had even later targeted Milim, causing devastation time and time again. His successful deicide had convinced him of his own invincibility, that death would never claim him. Yet none of these grandiose ambitions mattered to Yuki. To Yuki, the so-called next-generation god was nothing but delusional nonsense. With Mai Furuki present, Jahil knew there was no way to escape, so he shamelessly tried recruiting Yuki, offering him the position of his right-hand man. Yuki's expression darkened. With a half-lidded gaze, his playful smirk vanished, his voice cold and unwavering. Jahil had done too much to his comrades. At that moment, Manas Maria's voice echoed in his mind, offering her power to him, instructing him to use it well. Yuki needed no reminders. He had already mastered this ability. It was the strongest technique of Lord of Greed, lost entropy. Jahil tried to resist, but Yuki had already activated his finishing move. In an instant, Jahil's desperate obsession with survival was completely inverted, his very soul collapsing upon itself. The calamity that had sown misery throughout the world, the very embodiment of destruction, was finally erased by someone whose greed far surpassed his own. Jahil was annihilated, never to return. Kigali, tears welling in her eyes, recalled the painful past she had endured, overwhelmed by a mix of sorrow and relief. Eva, the faceless one, knelt before Kigali, addressing her as princess, her voice trembling with gratitude and joy. Yuki, approaching with his usual mischievous grin, feigned humility yet carried an unmistakable air of pride, casually remarking that perhaps he was a somewhat competent leader after all. For the moderate Harlequin alliance, after enduring so much suffering, it was a rare moment of peace and relief. Of course, the one to break the atmosphere was Luminous. With a gracious tone, she openly thanked Yuki, acknowledging that eliminating Jahil had been a great help. However, she knew full well that Yuki had his own agenda. Yuki, on the other hand, simply stated that my Furuki would be staying behind to assist in battle, before pointing toward the distant Habataki, who was expertly executing spatial maneuvers, subtly indicating that my Furuki's abilities would be the perfect counter to him. Luminous, in her usual commanding manner, immediately issued orders to my Furuki, her tone unquestionably authoritative, as if to say that she was the ruler here. My Furuki sighed, resigned to her fate. It seemed she had no room to refuse. Yuki patted her shoulder, casually advising her to call him if she needed help, before vanishing in an instant. It was clear, he had just used my Furuki's own skill, instant motion. For a moment, my Furuki stood frozen, utterly dumbfounded by Yuki's absurd genius. In such a short time, he had completely mastered her ability. Though a faint sense of being left behind lingered, my Furuki quickly steeled herself, accepting her role on Luminous' side, preparing to face Habataki head-on. And as for Yuki's destination, he was headed straight for the Divine Tree in Sarrion. The battle surrounding the Divine Tree had entered its second grueling stalemate. Although Milim was still rampaging, Chloe and Veldora's psychological tactics ensured that her power did not continue spiraling out of control. In a way, this strategy was far from perfect, but it was the only reason the world had not yet collapsed. Chloe, utilizing her ability to foresee the future and revert to the present, constantly corrected Veldora's actions to prevent any missteps that could further empower Milim. For example, when Veldora excitedly prepared to unleash his newly refined technique, Thunderstorm Humanoid version 2, Chloe instantly shot down the idea, not because the name was absurdly strange, but because such a display would only serve to strengthen Milim further. Chloe instructed Veldora to refrain from using any techniques that excessively exposed his unique magical traits, both to conserve his own energy and to prevent Milim from absorbing power and amplifying herself. Though Veldora was initially eager to display his flashy magic, he ultimately relented, resorting instead to physically blocking Milim's devastating magic blasts, ensuring that these deadly projectiles did not obliterate the Divine Tree or the surrounding refugee shelters. The unfortunate Veldora, all the while groaning dramatically in pain, continued to heroically tank each attack, forming a living shield of thunder and resilience. As he endured, he couldn't help but marvel at how terrifyingly strong his niece had become. Yet, what Veldora failed to grasp was that Milim was not growing, but rather being forcefully enhanced. His simple mind mistook this forced augmentation for natural growth, much to Chloe's exasperation. Still, he dutifully followed Chloe's instructions, knowing that any unnecessary resistance would only strengthen Milim further. However, this delicate stalemate meant that they were constantly teetering on the brink of collapse. But the fight was far from over, and they weren't the only ones refusing to give up. Little dragon Gaia had not ceased calling out to his master, Milim. His persistent cries were even beginning to take effect, as Milim's movements occasionally slowed, showing signs of hesitation. Meanwhile, Feldway observed the entire battlefield, growing increasingly frustrated as key moments were repeatedly disrupted. He had anticipated Milim would completely destroy the Divine Tree, yet his plans were continuously thwarted by Chloe and Veldora's relentless interference, especially Chloe, who seemed to precisely obstruct Milim's every move. This defied logic. Stampede Milim was supposed to grow stronger the longer she fought, making it impossible for anyone to suppress her. Why, then, had the battle reached such a deadlock? The last time Milim had lost control, it had taken both Guy and Ramiris pushing themselves to their absolute limits to barely contain her. Even then, Ramiris had been forced to burn through her divine authority, leaving her permanently weakened. That battle had proven Ramiris's true strength, as she had continuously wielded her power to isolate Milim from reality, significantly reducing her influence on the world. During that time, Guy had seized the opportunity to intervene, barely managing to bring Milim back to her senses. That had been a miracle only possible because of the two strongest individuals alive. Even Feldway himself had been astonished when he learned of the outcome. And yet, now, two individuals who had never encountered Stampede Milim before were handling the situation flawlessly, keeping her rampage from escalating further, a feat that even Feldway himself could not accomplish. After careful observation, Feldway deduced the truth: Chloe was manipulating time itself, perpetually reading the future and rewinding events to correct Veldora's actions. For Feldway, the solution was simple. He just needed to use time stop to sever her ability to rewind and eliminate her influence over the battle. Realizing his previous arrogance, Feldway decided it was time to act. But just as he was about to make his move, more interferences appeared, this time stronger than ever. Yuki and his group arrived on the battlefield, their presence radiating effortless confidence. With a casual smirk, Yuki turned to Leon, nonchalantly asking if he minded having a bit of extra help. And just like that, the battlefield shifted. 8 powerful warriors, Leon, Zelario, Sylvia, Elmesia, Yuki, Kigali, Laplace, and Tia, now stood united against Feldway. Zelario, ever cautious, immediately warned Yuki's group, explaining that Feldway had nearly mastered all of their abilities, particularly those who had once been under Michael's control, like Kigali and Yuki. Furthermore, any ability used against him a second time would be rendered ineffective. However, to Zelario's surprise, Yuki remained completely unfazed. With an amused chuckle, he brushed off the warning, remarking that this kind of enemy stealing your abilities trope was practically a cliché in manga. He then confidently added that he had yet to reveal his trump cards, and more importantly, he had acquired new abilities that even Feldway had never seen before. Zelario, always the serious one, found Yuki's remarks incredibly naive. He hesitated before giving up on arguing, realizing that Yuki wasn't a reckless fool. If he was speaking with such unwavering confidence, then perhaps he truly had a plan. With a resigned sigh, Zelario simply shook his head, opting to trust in the unknown for once. For Yuki, however, defeating Feldway was never his real objective. His true goal was to help Laplace, who had regained his memories, rescue his wife and daughter. Though Yuki was a selfish douchebag, he valued his allies. Laplace's sincerity had moved him, which was why he had brought Kigali, Tia, and Eva along to assist. More importantly, Yuki knew he didn't need to defeat Feldway. He only needed to ensure Elmesia and Sylvia's safety, while causing enough chaos to throw Feldway off balance before making a swift retreat. This was Yuki's irresponsibly brilliant strategy. Similarly, Laplace, true to his nature, saw no need for unnecessary fights. He specialized in playing the fool, using mockery and trickery to destabilize opponents rather than direct confrontation. He was more than willing to play the role of a clown if it meant achieving his objectives. And so, Laplace prepared to take to the skies, planning to stand alongside Yuki in battle. And only to be intercepted midair. A blazing streak of motion shot down from above, tackling Laplace at an impossible speed, locking his body in an iron grip. He barely had time to react before he found himself staring into the face of a woman, one that bore a bright yet chillingly menacing smile. It was Sylvia, his wife. In episode 85, when Jahil had launched his massive fireball attack, Sylvia had caught a glimpse of Laplace's true face, finally confirming that the man she had long mourned, the one she had believed lost to time itself, was still alive. But before she could even speak, Laplace had vanished once more. Sylvia had been devastated, but with no time to grieve, she had thrown herself into battle instead. Now, with Laplace standing before her once more, she could no longer suppress her emotions. Tightly locking her arms around his neck, she forced him to explain himself, demanding to know why he had lived all this time yet never sought her out. Laplace, in classic fashion, initially tried feigning ignorance, hoping to evade the confrontation. But his attempt to dodge the truth only infuriated Sylvia further. Without hesitation, she tightened her grip, her patience finally snapping. If Laplace refused to face reality, then she would force him to. Laplace, despite his regained memories, still harbored deep feelings for Sylvia. Seeing the tears glistening in her eyes, he sighed in resignation, abandoning his pretense. He confessed his true identity, but quickly added that this was neither the place nor the time for such a conversation, hoping she would allow them to speak properly later. However, upon hearing her name spoken by him once again, Sylvia felt a whirlwind of emotions, joy, grief, anger, all crashing into her at once. Without hesitation, she threw a fierce punch straight into Laplace's face, venting all the pent-up grievances and resentment she had bottled up for so long. Laplace staggered back, momentarily disoriented, yet the moment felt oddly familiar, so much so that he almost smiled. With a sigh, Laplace removed his mask, telling Sylvia that he needed to stall their enemies to buy her time to recover. That said, he turned, preparing to take to the skies once more. Yet, before he could ascend, Diablo appeared without warning, his hand clamping down on Laplace's shoulder, halting his movements. Diablo, speaking in his usual composed tone, stated that he had personal business to attend to, and the rest should be left to him. Without waiting for a response, Diablo turned his gaze toward Feldway, his golden eyes gleaming with an unsettling calm. Laplace stiffened. If there was one person in the world he absolutely did not want to deal with, it was Diablo. Memories of their past encounters surfaced in his mind, each one a near disaster. He understood all too well that any slight miscalculation when interacting with Diablo could lead to catastrophic consequences, making the primordial demon the most unpredictable and terrifying entity in his eyes. Sylvia, though surprised by Diablo's sudden arrival, was more focused on his intentions. Following his gaze, she realized he had no interest in them. His full attention was locked onto Feldway, a clear indication that he intended to take on the powerful foe alone. Feldway, too, immediately sensed Diablo's presence. He instinctively considered activating Time Stop, but the mere fact that Diablo had arrived via teleportation made him hesitate. He quickly readjusted his approach, choosing not to attack preemptively. Instead, he observed Diablo with cautious scrutiny, allowing Sylvia and the others to move freely without interference. His attention was now wholly fixated on this new adversary. Though Feldway had unwavering confidence in his own overwhelming magical power and mastery of techniques, he knew that against someone like Diablo, he could not afford to be careless. A small, unexpected desire stirred within him, the wish to settle this once and for all. Zelario, upon witnessing this tense confrontation, considered suggesting that he and Diablo work together to suppress Feldway. However, Diablo's response was cold and dismissive. With a smirk filled with arrogant amusement, Diablo declared that his goal was not to stop Feldway but to make the fool recognize the vast gap in their power. Zelario was stunned. The sheer audacity of Diablo's words was not an empty boast. His tone carried an undeniable certainty. Yet, from a purely analytical standpoint, Zelario found it impossible to comprehend Diablo's confidence. Diablo's energy levels were lower than Zelario's, let alone Feldway's. By all logic, he should have no advantage in this battle. What was Diablo thinking? Even Leon and Elmesia, watching from the sidelines, were equally perplexed. However, they sensed something unusual about Diablo today, as if he had a hidden card to play. Choosing to trust their instincts, they decided to hold back and observe. Yuki, for his part, also remained silent, his sharp intuition warning him that this Diablo was unlike any he had seen before. For the first time, Diablo was unleashing his presence without any restraints. Unlike in the past, where he concealed his full strength under Rimura's rule, now, he was utterly unshackled. Yuki's danger sense flared violently. There was no doubt, Diablo was far more terrifying than ever before. A silent understanding passed through the gathered warriors, and the battlefield naturally cleared, leaving the stage to Diablo and Feldway alone. Though Zelario still struggled to understand why they weren't attacking together, he ultimately resigned himself to this outcome, knowing there was no swaying the course of events now. And so, the climactic battle began. Diablo and Feldway stood alone in the skies above the divine tree, locked in a deadly duel where a single mistake could decide the fate of the world. Alright, that's all for this video. For those paying close attention, you may have noticed one of the biggest revelations in this episode. Jahil was the one who killed Veldanava. Yes, he is the true God Slayer, the only one who succeeded in such a feat. Of course, this ties back to Twilight's daddy issue, passed down to the next generation. Additionally, we previously speculated that Dino owed Kigali a significant favor, which likely stemmed from Dino destroying the kingdom where Jahil had possessed Kigali's father. This implies that Kigali made a deal with Dino to eliminate her own father. It's highly probable that the author will expand on these past events in detail later. Another notable piece of information is that during Milim's first rampage, Ramiris was actually the key figure in suppressing her, something that had never been explicitly mentioned before. In our next episode, we will delve into the long-awaited battle between Diablo and Feldway. With both wielding unimaginable power, this fight is bound to be one of the most intense yet. And of course, it will only get more thrilling from here. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Your support is greatly appreciated. See you in the next one.